People pleasers aren't nice. They're scared. That sounds harsh. But it's the most useful thing you can know about someone who can never say no. The agreeable person who volunteers before anyone has to ask, who says, "I don't mind," before they've even thought about it, who somehow ends up taking on everything nobody else wanted. That person isn't selfless. They're running a protection program the nervous system built years ago and never turned off. By the end of this, you're going to understand why being unable to say no has nothing to do with being a pushover, and everything to do with how a nervous system learns to stay safe. But here's the thing that makes this genuinely strange. If saying yes to everything is exhausting, and people pleasers know it's exhausting, why can't they just stop? That question has a specific answer, and it's not the one most people expect. Most people assume people-pleasing is about wanting to be liked. And it is, partly. But that's the surface version. Here's the deeper one. The nervous system, when it's faced with a threat it can't fight and can't run from, has a third option. Appease. Agree. Make the danger comfortable. Become so unthreatening, so agreeable, so useful, that the threat has no reason to activate. This is not a choice. It's a reflex. It fires before the conscious mind gets involved. Psychology has a name for it: the fawn response. It sits alongside fight, flight, and freeze as a fourth automatic survival mechanism. All four are responses to perceived threat. Three of them are obvious: fight, flight, freeze. Fawn. One of these looks like kindness. It isn't. Picture a kid growing up in a house where the atmosphere can shift without warning. A parent who is unpredictable. Not always, just sometimes, and there's no reliable way to know when. The child learns, quickly and thoroughly, that the way to stay safe is to read the room before walking into it. To answer questions the way they want to be answered. To not have visible needs. To be, above everything else, easy. That's not a personality forming. That's a nervous system solving a problem. And it solves it well. The child gets through. The strategy works. The trouble is that it works so well it becomes automatic. 20 years later, the threat is gone, but the strategy is still running, full speed. The fawn response develops when saying no, or disagreeing, or having visible needs feels genuinely dangerous. Not difficult, dangerous. The nervous system doesn't distinguish cleanly between social threat and physical threat. Disapproval, withdrawal of affection, a sudden change in someone's tone. To a developing nervous system, those things register as threat. So the system adapts. It gets very good at detecting early signs of displeasure. It learns to preempt conflict rather than respond to it. It learns that the fastest path to safety is to make the people around you comfortable, and that the safest version of yourself is the one with no sharp edges, no visible wants, no demands on anyone. Here's where it gets interesting. A person who has been running this strategy for long enough doesn't just suppress their reactions outwardly. They lose access to them internally. Ask a chronic people pleaser what they want for dinner, and they'll often genuinely not know. Not as evasion. The signal isn't there. The self-monitoring runs so deep that their own preferences stop registering. There's a concept for this sometimes called self-alienation, the gradual disconnection from your own wants and needs. It sounds abstract until you realize what it means in practice. A person can spend decades not knowing what they actually want, because having wants felt, at some point, like a risk they couldn't afford. Here's the finding that surprises most people. People pleasers are not low in emotional awareness. They're extraordinarily high in it, just pointed entirely outward. They're hyper-vigilant readers of other people. They notice micro-expressions, pick up tension from across a room, register a shift in someone's tone that nobody else caught. Not because they're especially empathetic in the warm sense, because early detection is how the strategy works. The fawn response is a threat monitoring system, and it's extremely well calibrated, just for everyone else's emotional state. Their own emotional state, meanwhile, often goes unregistered. They know immediately how everyone around them is feeling. They frequently have no idea how they are. Here's the second finding, which trips people up even more. The person who never complains, never pushes back, never causes trouble, they're often carrying significant resentment, quiet, suppressed, invisible from outside. The person who always says yes is frequently the most quietly furious person in the room. This isn't a contradiction. It's what happens when the mechanism runs long enough. Every unsaid no doesn't disappear. It just went inward instead of out. And then there's the part that's hardest to explain to anyone who doesn't experience it. The people around a people pleaser rarely notice any of this. They see someone easygoing, generous, someone who just seems to enjoy helping. The whole cost is invisible from outside. You probably know someone like this. Maybe you are this person. They're the one who takes on more at work, not because they wanted to, but because someone looked disappointed, and the discomfort of that look was worse than the extra workload. They cancel things they were looking forward to before anyone else has to ask. They apologize constantly for things that aren't their fault, for taking up space, for having a preference at all. There's also a specific tell that's easy to miss. When someone asks what they want, anything from where to have dinner to what they actually need from a relationship, there's often a pause, followed by a question, "What do you want?" Not because they're being polite, because redirecting attention away from their own preferences is so habitual, it happens before they notice they did it. The question gets deflected before the answer even has a chance to form. In close relationships, they have a remarkable ability to become whoever the other person seems to need. Agreeable, flexible, low maintenance, and they can sustain it for a long time. What's harder to sustain is the growing sense that the person being loved isn't quite them. It's a very polished version of them, with all the difficult parts quietly removed. At some point, the strategy that kept them safe stops feeling like a strategy. It just feels like who they are. So, why can't they just stop? Because the nervous system doesn't know it's safe yet. It's still running the same calculation it ran when they were 10 years old. Appease first, exist second. Not because the person is weak or lacks self-awareness or hasn't thought about it enough, but because that's what learned safety looks like. The nervous system doesn't update automatically. It updates when it has enough evidence that the threat is gone. Here's what's worth understanding. There is a difference between a strategy and an identity. A strategy forms in response to a specific situation. It can be examined. It can change. Identity feels fixed, like it's simply who you are. People pleasers almost universally experience their people-pleasing as the second thing. The work, for those who choose it, is learning to see it as the first. The person who can never say no isn't someone who doesn't know how. They're someone whose nervous system decided a long time ago that saying no wasn't safe. That decision made a lot of sense at the time. It kept them safe. It just never got the message that it could stop.